Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to talk to you guys a little bit about the importance of knowing why every exercise is in your routine, and actually putting thought into it and stepping back and asking, do I need to add this exercise? Does it bring something to the table that the current exercises I'm doing don't already? Or would I be better off just adding more of the same stuff that I'm doing? Does it enhance my training? And if I'm going to add an exercise, is this the best choice I could make for myself in terms of my own body, my individual needs, what role I'm using it for, and maybe my own enjoyment, and will I consistently do this exercise? These are the things that we need to ask ourselves, and this is part of the concept of training minimalism. And for those unfamiliar with it, training minimalism is the concept that you don't throw everything but the kitchen sink at yourself the way a lot of bodybuilders do. That particular group of people who train for that purpose have a tendency to do a lot of really random exercises and just stimulate stuff and hope they grow from the drugs. And I mean, that works if people use enough drugs, but if you're not willing to do that, that's not the best approach. It's sometimes better to step back and ask yourself, for example, for my back, if I'm already doing deadlifts, would I be better doing T-bar rows for myself? Would I be better doing pin lay rows? Should I add some weighted chin-ups? Maybe a combination of the three, maybe rotate them in different weeks. It's stepping back and assessing these things. Stepping back and assessing all of this. And I mean, I'll give you guys a perfect example. Let's say that you are wanting to work on the bench press. You're an intermediate level lifter. You want to work the bench press. You want your bench press to improve. You're using it to build strength. You're using it to build your pecs and your triceps. It's kind of asking the question of, what exercises do I want to throw in? Do I want to throw in more overhead pressing? Is that going to improve my bench, bring my shoulders up more to balance them with my chest? Is that going to help prevent injuries on the bench press? Because sometimes adding exercises aren't just about that. In many cases, yes, I would say that if a person's goal is to minimize shoulder injuries, they should be doing as much overhead pressing as bench pressing. And then we get into other questions like, well, I need more tricep. Should I simply add more overhead pressing or more benching? Or do they beat my recovery up too much? And that's exactly what we're talking about of, does another exercise add something that they don't? Because at a certain point, you can only recover from so much heavy benching. You can only recover from so much heavy overhead pressing. And if your triceps still aren't going to grow, that's when we step back and go, well, do I need a third exercise for the triceps? Should I do weighted dips? Because that's not a bad choice. Or should I use an isolation movement? Because maybe my shoulders and my wrists and everything can only handle the heavy compounds I'm doing now. So if I add weighted dips in, it's just going to be too much. My wrists are starting to hurt some weeks already, but you realize your triceps are maybe a weak link for you for what you're trying to do. Maybe it's aesthetically, maybe it's performance wise. So you say, I'm going to add a tricep isolation movement. And this is the thought process we use. Well, then it comes back to, well, which tricep exercise do I add? If I'm going to isolate a muscle, maybe I should pick one that's going to work best for my goals. Well, I could do this sort of skull crusher, but it seems to inflame my elbows every time I do it. Maybe I need to avoid that. Maybe I need to do skull crushers with dumbbells with a pronated grip instead of using the straight bar because it really aggravates my elbows and wrists. Or even stepping back and saying, why is it that I'm adding this tricep extension? Well, I'm doing it to bring up maybe the lateral head of my medial heads of my tricep need to be bigger for me to bench press more. That might be a valid reason for you to say, okay, so I need to do ones that focus on that. Maybe I'll do those with a wrist. Maybe I'll do them with a rope push down and spread it at the bottom a bit, but bring it up to the face so that it doesn't hit the elbows quite the same, bring it higher up. Or you might say, okay, I want to add something that my other movements aren't. Maybe my long head just needs more girth and the lateral and medial head are used in the bench so much I need more long head. In which case you might say, okay, maybe I need a different sort of tricep exercise for that. These are the questions that we ask. These are the questions that we ask. The same thing. You might be looking to bring up your biceps. Maybe your biceps need to grow. So you say, okay, I'm going to add in weighted chin-ups. Most people who've done a lot of weighted chin-ups and got strong at them generally going to agree weighted chin-ups will build big biceps. Anyone who tells you otherwise is full of it. The research and real-world experience show It's a great bicep exercise. But, you know, we get into the question of what else are we trying to get out of it? Do you need more rear delt with it? Do you need to add a rear delt fly? Because they're not getting enough work because the chin-up is the only exercise you're doing for it. And maybe you can't do as many chin-ups as you'd like because you're deadlifting heavy. So again, getting into this mindset of asking that. Is this big compound going to give me the biceps and rear delts I want? It would if that's all I was doing, absolutely, because I could put a lot of volume into it. And we know that volume and workload stimulate hypertrophy. So why would anyone ever bother with an isolation movement if they're doing chin-ups for any of those muscles? Well, maybe they can't do enough volume on the chin-ups because they're deadlifting heavy every single week, then their back starts to become a limiting factor. Well, if that's the case, for some people who say, you know, I'm doing these weighted chin-ups, but I can only do so much work on them, and my back is growing, but my biceps are still not quite where I want them because I'm not recovering from the deadlifts. In that case, that person might realize their biceps are lagging and they want bigger biceps. Maybe for aesthetic reasons. Maybe they're a physique guy and they realize that just to look at the proportions everyone wants to see, they're going to have to add a curl. Or maybe they're a power lifter and they want more bicep work just to make sure they lower their chances of injuring a bicep on the deadlift. So that's, again, when you step back and say, well, what sort of curl should I be doing? Well, maybe if I get something with a stretch position at the bottom, like an incline curl with a dumbbell, maybe that would be best for my powerlifting. Because that'll reduce the chances of tearing a bicep on the power lift. And if I'm going to do a curl anyways, I might as well pick the sort of curls that are going to have carryover to reduced injury on one of my other lifts. Or, you know, again, they might say, well, I don't want to do that because maybe my tendons get inflamed. Maybe because I do so much deadlifting, I try the incline curls, and with the chin-ups in there, my tendons get inflamed, so I'm going to focus on something that doesn't hammer the tendon the same way and do a concentration curl or just a standing strict barbell curl. So again, this whole thought process of asking ourselves, why do we have this exercise in? Not just saying, I'm going to train biceps, so I'm going to do 3 sorts of curls. No, it's not a good way to do it. Again, that's a lot of wasted effort, and it may not be the best exercises you could be doing right now for your goals, for your weaknesses. And remember, if you're doing any exercise for only one purpose at all, you can't come up with at least 2 reasons to do an exercise. I would say don't bother to do it. Unless the reason is, well, that exercise is required for the sort of competition I do. In which case, that's a good enough reason. But unless it is a sport-specific exercise that is either part of your testing for a sport, such as, again, bench press for football, American football, because of the combine, or bench press for powerlifting. In other words, unless it is something that you're going to be tested on directly for your sport as a competitive athlete, I'm going to say you probably need at least 2 reasons to do an exercise. And if you can't come up with 2 reasons to do an exercise, you should probably pick an exercise for the specific goal that you want to put that exercise in, for which you can find a second reason. Right? So that you can find a second reason. Because chin-ups, perfect example, look at all the stuff it does. It gives so much secondary carryover to a lot of other muscle groups, and it's just a good athletic exercise that it makes sense. You can probably find 3 or 4 reasons to do a chin-up. Depending on what your goals are, you can probably find several. But then when we start getting to the smaller minutia, that's where we get to, do I need something else? And it needs to be, well, because it maybe works the same muscles I need, but doesn't beat my recovery up as much. And that's ultimately the only real reason to ever throw an isolation movement in, and people need to realize that. Isolation movements have never been found in studies to produce more muscle growth than compounds. In other words, curls do not cause more bicep growth than chin-ups. In fact, in studies, curls don't even cause more bicep growth than lat pull downs most of the time. But you can handle more volume of them, right? They don't beat your recovery up as much. And volume is the primary driver, as far as we can tell, of muscle growth. So that's ultimately the reason we do those things. But that really is the way that you should look at things when you're selecting your exercises. If you want to have a well thought out program, you want to get the most possible out of what you do in the gym, you really need to have multiple reasons before you add an exercise in. It needs to be something that really fits perfectly into your overall situation. It shouldn't be random. It shouldn't be random. And again, what you'll oftentimes find is that if you can find another exercise that fits your goals better, because you find one that only has 2 reasons you could do, but you find another one that matches both those reasons and a third benefit, you would probably be better going with that other one that fits 3, wouldn't you? Because again, it will let you cut down your exercise selection, because the more exercises you do in any given week, the less you progress at any one thing that you do. So everything should be multifaceted in what it does for you. Alright guys, well that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.